Hello, my name is Heath Jones, and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. Occasionally, there are days where I have to give a bit of a disclaimer at the front about the background noise. Today is one of those days. I'm recording this in the moment that I have to record it in a building that is very busy with schools and children running around and other groups that meet here. And so if you hear that in the background, that is what you are hearing. But usually, with my first breath, what I say is what I'm going to say right now. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our podcast channel or leave a comment on this video or to this podcast by way of whatever app that you use to tune in. These points of connection will help our podcast and our YouTube channel to get more traction and more get to more people. And while you're at it, you should also check out the other podcasts at the AllIndianaPodcastNetwork.com. These Indiana-based podcasts are produced by them. They're an affiliate of Wish TV. You can also go to Wish TV's website, www.wishtv.com/podcast to discover more about that. And of course, there's our website, Northwood's website, Northwood Christian Church, being the church where I pastor. I encourage you to check us out there at www.indyncc.org. That's ndncc.org, where you can find our service times as well as other works that we are involved in, and you can also find past live streams, other videos there as well. It's a repertoire of all of our stuff, and you can find it there. But right now, just days out from Christmas, I'm wanting to let you know about Northwood's Christmas Eve service. It's at 7 p.m. on December the 24th here at our church in Indianapolis. Our address, which you can see right now on the screen, is 4550 Central Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, zip code 46205. We've got a special evening planned with carols, with children singing, acting as well. We have musical specials, the works. And so please come and welcome in this season with us. That being said, Christmas is in the air, and the story we'll be going over today is from the classic Christmas narrative. We'll be considering a story found in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. But first, we must take a brief pause for our podcast audience as you are about to be subjected to some ads and go. And we're back. And were the ads good? You know I don't, because here in video land, we don't see or hear the same ads as the podcast people, but I digress. And moving on, as I was saying, today we'll be going over a story found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, and I'll read it for you now. The story goes. Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be pregnant from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to divorce her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "Look, the virgin shall become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had given birth to a son, and he named him Jesus. Around Christmas time, pastors often will reflect on the same biblical passages year in and year out. If you think that our sermons around Christmas time are becoming repetitive, this may be why. The passages selected for us to read by the lectionary have to do with the Christmas story and the prophetic witnesses leading up to that moment in history. And so As I set out to prepare a sermon on a passage suggested to me by the lectionary, I often will preach from the lectionary. Not always, but I often will. But if I choose to, I have the benefit of many years of sermons on these themes to consult and to draw from. And as is often the case, I will cringe as I reread some of them, thinking to myself, did I really say or think that? But we grow in time. Cut myself some slack. All this to say, I went back and I looked at the last sermon that I preached on this passage from Matthew chapter 1. And it really wasn't long ago. I preached this passage in December of 2020. December of 2020. Bring yourself back to that moment if you dare. I preached on this passage just over a month after the 2020 election and just weeks before the January 6th storming of the Capitol. Fun times. What a great moment to remember that God is with us. Right. And then there's the question of Christmas plans during a pandemic. Do you remember that back in 2020? Maybe you're still having these discussions with your family, but back then we were in the thick of it for sure. And for many, this meant Christmas is spent apart from those that we love. And for others, this meant very careful planning. And for some, this led to not a little bit of contention, arguments about COVID safety, and people just trying to get it right. And you know the way it was, and it still is in some respects. The point is tension, no fun, exhausting conversations. And for Northwood, our church, do you remember? We had Christmas Eve outside. I sent out a message to the community, this community around our church, that we were requesting donations for Christmas trees so that we could set them up outside as the backdrop for our Christmas Eve service. And then I ordered a radio transmitter so that we could broadcast into the comfort of our vehicles to keep people safe during at the height of the global pandemic. And I looked up what the weather was like that evening on December 24th, 2020, and at 7 p.m. when we began that service, I was the one standing outside, everyone else in their cars, 17 degrees Fahrenheit with gusts of wind up to 25 miles an hour. And then the news turned out, which was awesome. All the local news affiliates turned out, and I even had relatives see us on watching their evening news all over the state. But as I stood there in the cold, freezing as I read the scriptures and stuttering out a sermon through chattering teeth, I must admit that I did wonder, what on earth am I doing here? I mean, seriously, when I was going to school to learn how to become a minister, none of this was on my mind. Where am I going with this? Well, I'm trying to let you know about my frame of mind over 2 years ago when I preached a sermon in church on this text. Actually, it would have been virtual. We weren't back in our sanctuary yet. So I preached this sermon virtually to my congregation, and I entitled it, Is God With Us? In the passage, Joseph is told, God will be with you. And the faithful have clung to this phrase, God will be with you, and others like it, to sustain them through the centuries. It is an assumed position for people of faith that God will be with them, is with them. But after the year we had in 2020, I have to confess, my mindset 2 years ago, the best I could do was to come up with a title in the form of a question, is God with us? And I meant it to be rhetorical, I think, because the punchline was always going to be, yes, God is with us, so keep your chin up. But I don't think I would have presented it in the form of a question if I had not been feeling some deep, intuitive feelings that there are reasons to doubt in the year 2020, whether or not we were with God or whether the Holy Spirit had left us. Sometimes it felt that way. So I titled the sermon in the form of a question to recognize the struggle, the tension people were feeling in relation to one another and to their faith. And the answer was yes in the end, but it felt to me more like I was giving the correct church answer. Of course the answer had to be yes. To that question, is God with us in church? Yes, and I meant it too. Or At best, I was trying to mean it. These emotions might perhaps help us better understand Joseph's frame of mind. Back to the story. So I'm dealing with the tension. Is God with me? Back to our story. Put yourself in Joseph's position with that question. Alongside that question, is God with him? Is God with us? Joseph had grown up in an occupied land. Strike one. As to the question, is God with us? Evidence, not good. Roman soldiers marching the streets. News of imperial intrigue made its way across the countryside all the way back to the backwater places like Galilee where Joseph lived. And Joseph's community lived precariously on the edge. And yet nothing ever seemed to change. He was born into this mess. Life was stressful and stagnant, both at the same time. And some would point occasionally to scriptures and still claim that God was on their side. Read back in the centuries the places where God was on their side and where they felt that God was on their side, or those promises in long periods of drought and desperation. God is still on your side. So people would read those and they would say, well, they said God is with us. Look at the evidence around us. Some would double down and say, yes, it's true, and others would become indignant. How dare you say that God signed us up for this? But for Joseph, things weren't all bad. Joseph finds himself engaged to be married. Now that's something. Have you ever been engaged? It's exciting. And I don't want to over-romanticize the situation. People back then didn't marry because they were in love, at least not very often. They married because their parents would settle things up and sort of arrange a marriage that would best benefit both families involved and hopefully the community at large. But still, Joseph was going somewhere. In his context and in his time, this is a good thing. At least something was happening. Something hopefully positive for Joseph. The beginnings of a family, children, and the rest of his life. So not bad if you're Joseph, or at least the best you could expect in Galilee when the Romans have occupied your space. But then the shoe drops. Your fiancée is pregnant, Joseph. That's what he's told. And he knows he's not the father. So what do? You're engaged to be married. Put yourself in those shoes. You're engaged. And your prospective spouse tells you that they're pregnant, but tries to convince you in the next breath that she's honored her contract with you. Oh, please, give us all a break and save your breath. The next question becomes, what will Joseph do now? Probably not feeling that God is with him in the moment. His world is spinning. What is he supposed to do? Big decisions ahead of him. He could have her sent away quietly, or he could have her executed by stoning. It's a good thing that it's Joseph thinking about these things, because the text tells us he's a righteous man. The narrator goes out of their way to let us know that this person is a righteous person, meaning he is trying his best to do things right. But he really isn't in a very good position. One of those between a rock and a hard place scenarios. There really isn't a good option for him. His life is in that place, similar to the places I found myself these past several years, where I too have found myself between a rock and many hard places all at once. Except, and I know that this isn't a competition, Joseph's situation is worse than any I have endured. I've never lived in an occupied land in that way, and I've never lived in poverty as Joseph has probably experienced poverty. And in regards to his personal life, his fiancée is pregnant. Not his kid. Very awkward. Never happened to me. Joseph is still thinking on these things. Again, ask him right in that moment, is God with you? What would he say? I think we could guess. But then he falls into a dream. And I'll just quickly notice how the dream comes while Joseph is still thinking about this. Now, I don't know if we are meant to think that Joseph is being thoughtful and wise and discerning, pondering the big problems, or if he's a frantic, anxious person like me, kept up by his stressful ruminations. Either way, he falls asleep. And the angelic visitor says, Joseph, son of David, knows his name. Do not be afraid. This child is a work of God. In fact, God's Spirit has led you to this place. Against all logic and good advice, take Mary as your wife. My paraphrase. So here's an invitation to trust. An invitation to trust during a difficult time. Does Joseph trust the God of his ancestors? Does Joseph believe in the God that the prophet Isaiah had written about centuries before, the prophet that is quoted at him by this angelic visitor? Isaiah 7, verse 14, "Look, a virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son. They will call him Emmanuel." Emmanuel means God with us. Words hundreds of years old by the time they are said to Joseph, but that's a tough pill to swallow. That the unexpected thing that is happening to him is not more evidence of God's absence and abandonment, but of God's intimate presence. This ancient prophecy envisioned a time when a child would be born that would usher in a new era. Everything will change because of this child and because of God's movement in the world, a movement that would bring Israel out of the old and into the newness of God's new created order. That's the vision, that's the hope of the prophets, and that's what Joseph is being asked to participate in, that work. Joseph is at this moment being invited to be a participant in the movement that would usher in this newness. Joseph is invited not just to only participate, but to play a role that is at first disorienting, but could be seen as a potential blessing if he can frame it that way. Joseph would, we know the story, courageously say yes to the process, taking Mary as his wife. Public opinion be damned. And then the child was born, and they would call him Jesus. This would be the beginning of a wild ride. Joseph would be visited by an angelic person 2 more times, first sending him and his family fleeing to Egypt, and then sending him back to the place where he called home. And these events were just the beginning of a dance with the divine, a dance that calls the participants to a deep trust in the God who has promised to be with us. And he would discover it to be so. So the question for us is, have we? Have you and I discovered it to be true? That God has been, is with us? 2 years ago, here's what I said in answer. And I'm quoting from my sermon that I preached at that time. So Heath quoting Heath from 2 years ago. Okay. But I said, Joseph would step out in trust and would become one of the heroes of our faith. He would continue to live on the edge, but with the sense that after a series of trust falls into the arms of God, his life might become evidence of the deep truth that God is with us. And God is with us. This much I believe. End quote. And now here we are, after a series of trust falls. And since I preached that sermon in 2020, people have come and gone. Some of our brothers and sisters have died, more than I'd like to consider. And still others have joined our community, and that's good. There have been seasons of high hopes, but then also of great disappointments. And many of the same problems plague us, even if in new ways. The pandemic, there was just another election, if you can believe it. And there is another one coming, if you can believe it. But still, here we are. And I feel as though we are not simply just here. I feel this way. I feel as though God has been with us and is with us even now. And I feel that we are poised, positioned on the edge of a great adventure together, a revival, a renewal of everything. But not a repeat of what has happened, something new, something that will give life to us all. So this year, I titled this message something different. I called it, no big revelatory reveal, God is with us. I called it, God is with us. Not very original, I know, but it's as simple and plain as it needs to be put. God is with us. We've seen this throughout these past several years, and our spiritual ancestors, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Joseph in today's story, have shown us what it looks like to accept this truth, that God is with us. So your invitation in response to this message, in this week before Christmas, is this: join the movement. Join the movement and the story of which Joseph, Mary, Jesus, the disciples, the apostles, pastors, priests, preachers, missionaries, and all Christians have been a part of. Join the story of our redemption and salvation. The story of the community of people who chose to say it again. God is with us. And then they found it to be true. Reflect the values of Jesus and his way of life, even as we obediently and bravely step out into a world that seems to deny the truth and power of Christmas. And when we do, we discover that God is truly with us. We, along with Joseph, can say yes to this unexpected, surprising, and unbelievable dream. But in the end, you'll have to answer the question. You'll have to answer it for yourself. Is God with us or not? And if God is with us, then we can trust in the one who led Joseph to that place and Jesus through the grave and on to life. We can trust the one who has kept us, you and me, safe thus far, and is even now yearning to bring healing and wholeness into our world, to our nation, our communities. So, let this sink in. Truly, God is with you. God is with us. And because God is with us, we don't need to be afraid anymore. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.